All right, so assignment 3, continuing with it. We hope our files are all organized. And so far, I've saved it as the assignment 3, which is basically assignment 1 with my creature PNG put in. And then I added some additional texture fills to show breath coming out of the mouth. I did a duplicate of some of the landscape elements from assignment 1 in those individual layers that overlapped with the front of my creature, and then kind of cut those out. But because in my first example here, I'm hiding where the creature touches the ground, which makes for a very believable illusion, it also means I don't have to worry too much about the shadow that the creature is casting, because I don't see the ground that it's on. But I'll finish this by showing you how I would work with that. I use this clone stamp layer to put some frost. This is where I ended on the fins at the back, so you can see how that helps kind of bring those colors together. And to kind of frost the horns a little bit, because he's exposed to these elements. So all of these things help to put our creature there and make it more believable. But probably the thing that helps most is this extra kind of breath that's coming from his mouth and coming up. And that's just a targeted texture fill. Now, what if I want to make him cast more of a shadow on all of these elements around him? So I have that little element in front, right? Let's say I didn't have that, and I wanted to put a shadow underneath my creature. So what I would do is underneath my creature layer, I would make a new layer, new blank layer, and then I'm going to fill it, edit fill, with 50% gray. Okay, so that covers everything below my creature's layer with gray. Then I am basically going to change its blending mode, this is why it's called an overlay layer, to overlay. And by doing that, that 50% gray doesn't affect anything. I'll mark it with a color just so you can see. I'll make it green. And I'll label this an overlay layer. Now, an overlay layer won't show you anything that's 50% gray, but it will darken things that are darker than 50% gray, and it will lighten things that are lighter. So now to add the shadow, without having to affect the actual pixels of my asset layers, I'm going to use the overlay layer, and I'm going to use the burn tool. I'm going to affect the midtones. About 27 is a pretty strong exposure, but it should show it pretty clearly. A nice big soft brush. And I'm going to start burning. Darkening the shadow. And I can do it first with the midtones, and then if I need more, if I change it to normal mode, you'll see what that does. Right? So I just added that burned shadow. And what it did is show on the overlay layer, but because it's set to overlay instead of normal, that burning area that I did, it now affects the layers underneath. So now I can do the highlights a little bit. And I can also dodge. So I can also lighten on this overlay layer. So if I want to lighten the midtones, if I want to brighten up the background here, and maybe burn the water underneath that, give a little bit more of a reflection, I can do that. And then dodge, make this a little bit smaller. And burn again, burn the midtones down. So this gives me full control of dodging and burning without ever hurting the layers themselves. So that little reflection I'm trying to suggest in the water. So that makes a big difference. And then, of course, you can keep working with it. And what I love about overlay layers, if I just use my brush, this is the first time we've used the brush, and I use 50% gray, I can basically erase it. So if I didn't like what I did, and we can use clone stamp too for this. It's darker than 50% gray, so let me go on normal mode, show you what I mean. So what I can do is I can use a clone stamp, that's a tool we're familiar with, get nice and big, at 100% opacity, soft brush. And I can basically paint in with 50% gray that I'm stealing from up here. Even when I'm on overlay mode, to kind of undo some of these changes I made. You can see how effective they are. So if I do overlay, I do clone stamp, but then I change it to be current layer, and I'm on my overlay layer, then even when I'm not looking at it, I can do it with a low opacity and kind of work those changes more subtly. All right. Now, that messed with, because this is above my overlay layer, that messed with that a little bit, so all I have to do is move my overlay layer up if I want those effects underneath. So understanding kind of your layer management, what it does to these things, and then how you can work with it, smooth it out. If I do a really soft kind of clone stamp, I can soften those shadows a bit. Get that illusion to work even better. Okay, now what if I want to change the whole thing and basically do an overlay layer across everything, but to change the colors? That is when we would use something called an adjustment layer. And for that, you can go up to layer options and say new adjustment layer. And I like to do my color balance, my favorite one, at the very top. So if I do a color balance adjustment layer, you see how it's over the top of everything now. Even though it's not affecting the layers directly, I can vastly glaze over and change the balance of this overall. In the midtones, in the shadows, in the highlights. And that will help glaze my character into the landscape a little bit. My favorites are levels, color balance, and hue saturation. So I can create an adjustment layer for each one if I want. I can work on levels, And then I can limit my lights just a little bit, make it a little bit darker. Play with my midtones. Overall, do I want it a little bit brighter or a little bit darker? And then last adjustment layer, I can use hue saturation. And this will be very subtle, but I'm just going to take my saturation down a little bit. And maybe shift my hue overall. I don't want anything crazy. Just shift it a little bit to one side or the other. See what I like. And then at any time, you can click on these and you can change their settings. It's nice to check what it looks like without any saturation, just to make sure things are still readable in grayscale, so that you're not relying too much on color alone to help separate things. And then, because they're on their separate layers, these are adjustments. They can be turned on and off. You want to make sure each one feels like an improvement. That one definitely helps. That one helps, but maybe I don't need it quite so much. So I can take its opacity down. And this one, it's a little extreme, so I'll do it very faint opacity. So those are adjustment layers that kind of float over everything. I'll go ahead and save that. So just to review really quickly, how would I put in a creature? Well, if I put in my creature again, I bring in the PNG. Let's say I like him right there. I place him right there. Next thing I'm going to do is adjust that individual layer's levels, that creature. I'm going to adjust, let's rasterize it first so I can make these changes. I'm going to adjust their color balance for sure to kind of match the temperature of the surrounding. Okay. I'm going to look at where they overlap with the background. And in this case, I take this background layer right there, and I'm going to copy a chunk of it that overlaps with my creature, like so, and duplicate it and move it on top of my creature's layer. Right, so then I can erase away from it. And be able to use it. If I need a shadow underneath my creature, this is where I do my overlay layer. So right behind my creature, I make a new blank layer, I fill it, edit fill with 50% gray. I then set it to overlay mode. And that allows me to dodge and burn it. Let's start by burning. I can even move it over the top of my creature if I need to dodge and burn on the creature as well. I'm just doing the midtones right now, kind of darkening the feet. If I do the highlights, hit some of those. I can have it cast a shadow on the environment that way, like this ice.